today. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I was just tweaking with some audio. So if you can't hear me, just comment in the chat. Cool. All right. Sweet. Yeah. So yeah, today is my turn, I guess, to take over for the creative live stream that we do every Wednesday. And today, what we want to do, if you were tuning in on yesterday, we talked about building a Zoom application and seeing how we can integrate Rive to do that. And so, oh, sorry, one second. Looks like the Twitch integration is not working. Okay, never mind. I think it's on Twitch's end. Yeah, so for those of you maybe not familiar with Zoom apps, if you don't use Zoom, Zoom apps are kind of just a way to enhance your Zoom meeting capabilities. And really, I only have like a very surface level understanding of it. We internally had discovered that Zoom has a bunch of SDKs and APIs to tap into to create these Zoom applications where you can create basically anything you want on a kind of collaborative canvas. So the screen that you usually see with everyone's talking heads, you could have some kind of graphic or immersive display that kind of gives you a free-for-all canvas to draw on top of if you want to build more interactive experiences. Some people are doing games. Some people are using it for collaborative purposes like taking notes or using timers and things like that. And so just to kind of show what these Zoom apps are, I'm going to show my screen. Cool. Yeah, just to tap into this, you can go to developers.zoom.us, and it gives you a bunch of guides on kind of all their different offerings from a developer perspective, things that you can tap into, such as their video SDK, their meeting SDK, Zoom apps, team chat apps. Honestly, I don't really have like a whole comprehensive understanding of all of the Zoom products, so a lot of these are kind of lost on me. But yeah, I just wanted to explore what building a Zoom app might look like using their Zoom Apps SDK, which utilizes web technologies. So if we dive in here, the docs kind of give a brief overview of what they are. They're basically integrations for third parties to build on top of the Zoom platform. And you don't need some kind of fancy Zoom paid tier to be able to create an app. You can do this for free on a free account. And so, yeah, we're going to be playing with that today. And yeah, it lists out some of the things that are the supported operating systems and all that good stuff that you need to know before building an app. But then the docs go over things that you'll need. So you need a Zoom account, of course. The architecture, what this looks like. It's kind of heavy and very specific in terms of things that you should consider at security time. So authentication, data access, all that good stuff is something that if you want to create a Zoom app, you'll want to kind of just keep in mind when you're doing that. But really what we want to get at is this layers API. This is what we're going to play with today. So this is the first thing I saw when I was kind of perusing their docs, which was pretty cool. It looks like this person is building this kind of like immersive PowerPoint kind of deck app to present. And so you can see here, while they're presenting, they've got this kind of overlay of, let me zoom in a bit, got this overlay of things that they're wanting to show. So if you want to portray content more in a, I guess, in a less boring way, I guess, in a more fun way and interactive way, creating a Zoom app might be for you. And so, yeah, I think the possibilities here are pretty endless, and I'd love to play more with it. Today, we're really just going to do a very surface level kind of look at how to build a Zoom app and what's like the bare minimum to just get anything from Rive displaying on Zoom. And then also what Zoom offerings offer for like tapping into certain functionalities, like when someone's talking, can you get a callback for that and then do something with it? If you're a Rive user and you're familiar with the state machine, that might lend to some things like, ooh, when a user's talking, I can go to this state and do something. And so that's going to be pretty useful if you're creating Zoom apps. But anyway, I digress. What we're going to do is we're going to actually, and I've already actually built this app out because there was a lot of tinkering to try and get this to work over the past few days. But Zoom provides these kind of like, let me see if I can find it. Create a Zoom app. Oh, they have these like reference applications for like getting a basic JavaScript Zoom application up and running. And also, by the way, if I didn't mention, creating a Zoom app works off of existing web technologies. So if you've got some familiarity with JavaScript, this will go really hand in hand with building a Zoom app. But today we're going to be looking at this custom layout Zoom apps sample. And what this is going to do is basically take all the participants in a Zoom call and try and layer them onto the shared canvas. And the canvas is, again, that big meeting thing that you see where everyone's face usually is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share my Zoom screen and show you kind of a preview of like what we'll be doing. Also, if you're here yesterday, I was also unsure how this would work because I'm like doing screen sharing through another screen sharing app. So hopefully this looks okay on y'all's end. But yeah, so this is my Zoom client on my current machine. And here I've got my, I guess, personal laptop that's also running Zoom, just for purposes of showing how this kind of looks with multiple people. So yeah, this is why I kind of have like two setups of myself here. But you'll see, I don't know if I can zoom in. Okay, unfortunately I can't. No, I cannot. Here I've basically got this like side tab. If you're familiar with Zoom, this is, again, usually a place where you would find like the chats. But here in this case, I've opened up apps, and you can get that by on this bottom bar, there's an apps icon here. Hey everyone, hey Jeff, hey Laura, welcome in. Yeah, so we're clicking this apps icon to see all the apps configured. I've already configured my testing app, and Zoom has a bunch of documentation on how to get an app set up locally. But yeah, I have this test and Rive app, and again, this is kind of built on this kind of template that Zoom's developer relations team, their engineering team has already built out as a sample app, and we're just kind of extending it to show how you can use Rive with it. So you can see here, if you zoom in a bit, maybe on your ends, we've got this application on the sidebar that's running, and this is all HTML and JavaScript that's running. And so what has happened, I clicked on the Test and Rive app, and it's authenticated my application for this Zoom meeting. And if you use some of their template applications, you don't have to worry about this because that's already been coded in. I know some of that stuff can be pretty tedious, but we've got this immersive Zoom app sample. There's a bunch of different modes that Zoom runs in. What we're going to be working with is this immersive mode, which, how I understand it, basically takes like a crop out of your body without your background, and then you can place that however you need on this like canvas right here, the main thing that we're sharing. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all the participants, and I'm going to start this session. And you'll see here, I've got my two cameras of myself that you just saw in the previous client view, but I used some JavaScript to kind of position, I guess, my camera view appropriately in this big white canvas space. So I'm using a bunch of JavaScript, and this is actually all like one big canvas. If I, actually, I don't know if I'll be able to show you the inspect element. Kind of. Okay, so on my side, you can kind of see like a developer console, similar to like how you would debug in Safari. But I think in your view, you can see here that I'm highlighting a single canvas element, and I'm using the Zoom SDK to basically draw a participant, aka like a single person, onto the canvas, at certain coordinates. So I'm just doing some basic math here based on how many participants, or actually I'm not doing it, the sample app has this. What the sample app is doing is based on how many participants I've selected, we'll lay out the canvas or the camera of each person onto this white canvas. And so you can see that's all just one canvas element. And you'll also see that red kind of bobbing thing behind my main camera view right here. This is actually a Rive element, and I might be able to highlight this. Yeah, you'll see here that I've got another separate canvas element that's kind of drawn on top of the main canvas element that's showing off all of the camera display. And I'm just calling this Rive canvas, but yeah, this is, if you're familiar with using the JavaScript APIs, with the web runtime for Rive, you'll know that you have to create a canvas element in order to draw Rive on your websites. Rive will basically draw inside of the canvas. And so I've just provided a separate canvas to layer on top of this. So yeah, I'm creating a web page. You can imagine this is just kind of like a blank slate that you can draw on top of. And I decided to draw another canvas on top of it. So that's how I'm getting Rive content to kind of show behind my person. And the cool part I wanted to play with was some of the Zoom SDKs, particularly like, are there any actions I can tap into? Like, can I tell when a certain person is speaking, and can I get that person's info, like their ID, and see if I can maybe move Rive content to that person? So right now it's defaulting to behind my current main participant view. But if I go to my second machine and I unmute myself to start talking, hello, 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 you'll see that the Zoom view kind of moved behind that second, or I guess my second machine right here below. And really all I did there, and we'll dig into the code in a bit, all I did there was kind of reposition the canvas element accordingly based on the participant who's talking. And we'll see what kind of metadata we can get out of that. But yeah, that's essentially what we're going to be playing with today. And if we have time at the end, we'll play with other more exciting Rive animations. This one is a static animation I found on the community. That's just like a loading thing. So this is kind of a cool way to signify like, hey, who is speaking, and then have a Rive animation show beneath the person that's actually speaking. And this is, again, super bare bones. You could do much more interesting things. This is just all I could find in a short span of time for kind of dictating who is speaking. But I'm sure, there's many more interesting animations and state machines that you could have that kind of interact with this. So anyway, that's what we'll be going over. I'm going to stop sharing this now and go back to sharing my whole screen here. Cool. All right. So just to kind of show how we got that like triple dot rendering onto the canvas view. Again, what I did is I basically pulled down from the sample Zoom app repo. I pulled this code down and I'm just editing it locally. And after this live stream, I'll be sure to push this up to open source on my personal repo, so you guys can take a look at the code side by side to see what changes were made to support Rive. Cool. So this app has a pretty interesting kind of setup here. It's got kind of a back end and a front end that we're managing. So not everything is all very front end JavaScript based. There are some back end components that we're using an Express node server for. In particular, the backend is needed for doing authentication, rerouting, and some other ancillary security things that Zoom needs to kind of work. So I want to just show off this index.pug here. And what this is doing, let me take that down. Oh, that's not what I wanted. We've got this index.pug. This is basically kind of a way to format HTML in a different kind of markup. And so you can see this is kind of what we saw at the beginning, immersive Zoom app sample, and it's prompting us to start a meeting to use the app. And then there's some elements here, canvas, hashtag UI canvas. What this means is display a canvas element with an ID called UI canvas. This UI canvas is going to be the place where we render out the Zoom like participants and the white canvas part. And then below that is a part I added called canvas hashtag Rive canvas. And so this is just creating a separate Rive canvas in my markup, and I'm giving it an ID attribute of Rive canvas so that I can draw to a separate canvas for Rive content. So as far as like HTML elements are concerned, in this particular project, there's these .pug files. I'm not sure what that actually stands for. But yeah, again, it's just a different way to mark up what you want for HTML in your resulting end application. And so this index.pug is where I added my Rive canvas. We may add more to that later on if we get time to build on this. And I'm going to skip over, because I think this creative stream could go super long, into, I'm going to skip over the parts on like how it's doing authentication and role permissions and things like that, because they have very extensive documentation. And so you can check that out if you're interested in building an app. But I did want to quickly show you how I made an app in Zoom. So I had to log in with my Zoom account on the marketplace.zoom.us. And I can create an app. I've already created it here, but just to kind of show you what I've configured. The Zoom app thing that I'm building on top of actually shows you a bunch of prerequisites that you need to actually run this application yourself locally. So a few things that you need are Node.js, this tool called ngrok, and then some Zoom accounts. Ngrok is basically this tool that you can download, and it's free to use, and it's basically a way to surface your localhost app onto the internet so that when I'm actually creating an application that Zoom is trying to authenticate with, it's not trying to authenticate with my like localhost 8080 port 8080. I can use ngrok to basically port my localhost 8080 to a temporary ngrok URL. And what that looks like, I might be able to show you here, is this. So actually, let me zoom in more. Yeah, so I ran this ngrok command, and you can find more on the ngrok tooling website to show you how you can do that. But I basically just ran a simple ngrok command to say, hey, port this over to my localhost 3000. So this is what I have locally running for my web application. And then it creates this URL that I can use, for example, with an HTTPS URL. If you were to go to this application yourself, you might find the main index page, or you might get rerouted because you don't have permissions. But this is a surfaceable, queryable URL for the internet, and this is what I configured my test-in Rive Zoom app with. So you can see here I've got my ngrok URL, and then when I create an app, it automatically generates a client ID and a secret for you. These are things that you want to store in environment variables for your application. And that's another reason why you need a backend for your web application, because you need some way to store these client ID, the client secret, to successfully authenticate when you're running the application. And so as I'm also creating the Zoom app, I can do things like what's the name and what's the description. If I were to actually publish this Zoom app, Zoom as an actual like app marketplace that you can query. But yeah, I'm just doing this for local development purposes. I'm going to skip over all of that. The main part that you'll want to keep in mind is this Zoom app SDK portion. And so here, when you're creating a Zoom app, you have to actually manually request what SDKs and callback events you want to subscribe to. So for example, in this Zoom app, Zoom sample app, it actually tells you the list of things that you'll want to configure for your Zoom app on the marketplace. So for this Zoom app, you need all these different APIs like clear image, raw image, draw participant, so these APIs specifically draw participant. This is the API that we call in the SDK to actually draw our camera and our faces onto that web canvas. And so, yeah, we need all of these APIs to be able to effectively make this simple app work. But yeah, there's a bunch. You can read up on it on the Zoom docs. Consequently, and other than APIs, there are events that you want to subscribe to. And in particular, we have this on-active speaker change API. Let me zoom in a bit here. And so you can see here, notify Zoom app when this active speaker changes during a meeting. So what I can do in my Zoom app is I can, very similar to the Rive API, I can get a callback to when a certain event has happened. So for example, or I guess what you just saw in the Zoom example that I was just showing on the Zoom app was when the speaker has changed, the active speaker has changed people, you can get a callback into your Zoom app for that and then do whatever logic you need. Very similar to like when you're using the Rive runtime APIs, you might be familiar with the on-state change callback. And that's how you can subscribe to when you've changed states in the state machine and then do whatever logic you need there. Zoom SDKs work on a very similar principle, except that with Zoom SDKs, you need to actually subscribe to which of these events that you want to get notified on. And I think this is, you need to subscribe to this because it'll notify the user. If you were to, for example, publish your Zoom app to the marketplace, they'll get an upfront notice like, hey, the app is going to get these details, it's going to do these things, I presume. Same thing with scopes. So like you'll want to get define or add different scopes on what you need. So for example, this is a particularly necessary one. So or these two in general, where you can get the user's info, which include like a UUID to identify which participant is speaking in our case, and some other ancillary metadata on like where is the participant placed on the screen and things like that. So yeah, once you've kind of configured that all in the Zoom marketplace, then you can start working with your Zoom app. They've also got this .env.sample in the Zoom app that we're working with in code. And basically here's where you configure that client ID that I just showed you on that website, on the dashboard there, as well as your secret, and then a redirect URL. So this is kind of doing this OAuth dance to authenticate your application. So Zoom knows like, hey, I'm the app that's trying to run on a meeting is who it is actually the app that I want to run, and not some like fake imposter app or something like that. Cool. All right, so the part that the next thing I want to go over is actually another security bit. So with Zoom apps by default, you need to configure a few like security bits here. In particular, the content security policy. Some web applications will have this, where basically it defines what kind of JavaScript can be run, what kind of resources can be retrieved for the application. And it's just to be super secure in case, like, for example, a library were to request a resource that you didn't know of in your application that made a malicious call to, I don't know, call some other JavaScript that could do malicious things. So the content security policy is something that you'll need to configure with Zoom apps. You'll see here that I'm configuring a bunch of Rive URLs. This could actually be a lot more generalized, but I was just hard coding things for testing. So basically when my app calls for retrieving these Rive URLs, which we're going to be playing with, I want to basically tell my backend application and set up like, hey, my application is going to be calling these specific Rive URLs and resources. It's okay. Specifically, also because our Rive web runtime works off of making a call to get a WebAssembly file, or WASM as we call it, we need to provide this WASM unsafe eval to the security policy. And I probably might need to restart the Zoom meeting in a bit, but that's okay. So anyway, there's some headers and middleware that we need to configure. This is actually already part of the sample app. I was just adding some of these URLs so that, yeah, this is all just part of the config. So no big change there. All right, so to actually dive into, let me see, what else was I changing? Oh, to actually dive into, I guess, more config that we need to set up when I'm using the Zoom SDK. In addition to actually explicitly saying in the app marketplace for the app that I am configuring, like what features I need for the Zoom app SDK, I need to also configure that in my application when I'm configuring the SDK, like what APIs and what events I need to subscribe to. So most of these were already set up. In particular, I added this drop participant API and on active speaker change API, because those are new things that I'm introducing to this sample app. And yeah, what else am I running? I'll get into that in a bit. Okay. Some other things that I should mention, we also have CSS files for laying out, for example, that UI canvas. The UI canvas, again, is the thing that's just drawing the whole, both participants on screen. And so I'm giving that, you saw that I took up the entire screen. That's because it's a fixed element that has all that configured at 0, so it takes up the entire screen. Same thing with Rive Canvas. I want to make it a fixed element and have it kind of appear on top of things. Moving on, I have this index.js file. And here, again, is a lot of the boilerplate from the sample app. This index.js file is responsible for basically displaying this UI here, this part where it's prompting users for like what color to do, and also the JavaScript for like what happens if I change a different color. I'm not actually using this functionality for now, but it also handles, like, for example, when I'm selecting my participants and I click start session, what should happen? This kind of all happens in this index.js file. So I was just tapping into this and noticing, okay, at the top here, it's grabbing all these UI elements. And if you've used the Web JS runtime, you'll notice this is pretty similar. You have to get a reference to the Rive canvas that you're building. So I added this part here. I'm getting a reference to the Rive canvas that was in my index.pug file. And so now for this index.js file, I have a reference to this Rive canvas. Where'd you go? Rive. And so we'll be using that down here. So I'm starting in this render function. Let me make sure I remember where this is happening. Oh, okay. So what's happening is in my Zoom app, what's happening is when I clicked all my participants that I wanted to start a session with, when I click start session, this index.js has this on-click callback that I'm setting on this button, which is that start session button. And it's getting all the participants that are being selected. And I'm going to draw each member by calling this render function. And if I go back to the render function, cool, yeah, thanks for joining, Eric. yeah, I'll post the code after this so y'all can just kind of peruse this. I think that'll probably be easier to digest than me kind of jumping around, especially if you haven't seen the code before. Did want to check out this other question. No Essence has not been keeping time with Rive features as well as I'd hope. Let me show this. I have so many restrictions in Unity. Yeah, we, so Noesis, I guess to kind of just shift gears for a bit to answer this question. Yeah, Noesis has built the actual Rive integration. They use our underlying CPP runtime. That's the thing that gets updated. That's the thing that updates all of our ancillary like web, iOS, Android, React Native runtimes. And so, yeah, we keep in touch. We're in constant contact with the actual Noesis team and the people that built out the integration. And so we definitely, it's kind of a collaborative effort to make sure that the features that we put out are kind of being supported in parity with the Noesis integration so that you can use it in Unity and Unreal and other game engines. So yeah, when we do tend to release a new feature, like for example, we just released the follow path constraint. Sometimes these integrations that are not built directly by us, they will need some time to kind of catch up on what changes were made in CPP and how they integrate it into their renderer, into their runtime, things like that. But we are definitely in constant contact with the Noesis team to upgrade these things. But yeah, definitely reach out. I think Noesis has a dev forum that you can post to and ask for support on certain features, or if something's not working exactly as you would expect, you can reach out on their forum and they're super responsive on getting back, and it might already be in progress for their next release that they have in Noesis land. So yeah, definitely check there. Got any questions? Yeah, and as I'm working through all of this, because I'm just kind of rambling, and I think it'll make a lot more sense to kind of just go over the code after this, feel free to leave any comments or questions that you have, either regarding this Zoom experiment or anything Rive related. So yeah, happy to answer any questions then. Yeah, back to my render function that I was looking over. What this is doing is it's basically setting the canvas styles here. So actually, let me go back. So this is basically saying, hey, take the device pixel ratio and the inner width and height of your Zoom window and set it to 100% and fill that whole space. So that's why the whole canvas is white. And then we're clearing anything that was previously drawn there. And we're calling this draw function. And what this draw function does, I'm going to zoom out a bit, go to canvas.js. It's coming from this canvas.js file. What this draw function is doing, it's looping over every participant that I've selected in the initial Zoom app, and it's drawing this quadrant. And without going into all of the math of what that's doing, you can imagine it's drawing a quadrant for each Zoom participant. In this case, this app is hard-coded to only have max like 4 participants. But if you were laying out your canvas in your own app, you could have as many participants as you need and lay out people however you want. You could have them randomly appearing on the canvas rather than just drawing quadrants. But this particular app is just for each participant drawing them at a single quadrant in each section of the screen. So that's what that draw quadrant part is doing here. And actually this draw method. And then it returns some data. This data is basically for each participant, what coordinate in the canvas are they laid out at, and we're going to be using that in a bit. But after I've kind of laid out all the participants on the screen, now we're actually going to be drawing Rive, which is the red dots that you see here. And just also again to show it changes on speaker change. if I start talking here, the Rive thing should go back to my original screen. So yeah, that's fun. What we're gonna do now after drawing the oh shoot. Part of the unfortunate part of being on like the free tier Zoom is you only get like 40 minutes in a Zoom meeting, which obviously is not ideal for an hour-long live stream. But yeah, so anyway, after I've drawn all the participants on the screen, what I'm going to be doing is instantiating Rive. And so for those of you familiar with drawing Rive and using the web runtime, this should look pretty at home. I'm using the Rive runtime. You can see in my package JSON, I've installed the Rive app canvas dependency. And actually, this is pretty outdated. There's actually a 2.0 version of the Canvas and Canvas Advanced, which is our low-level runtime. Usually when we do these major version bumps, for example, the 2.0, there's a big feature waiting in the works. So I won't say more on that, but you can keep your eyes and ears peeled on social medias and our Discord to see why we made major version bump. But anyway, going back to this part, I'm instantiating Rive. I'm providing a source attribute with my actual Rive file. Again, this is the thing that I allowed my web application to be like, hey, I'm going to be making a resource call to this Rive file at this URL. It's okay. It's not malicious, blah, blah, blah. It's cool. I'm also setting autoplay to true. I'm giving it the Rive canvas. And again, that Rive canvas is the part where I got, where are you? Oh yeah, here. I called the document element by ID, the Rive canvas. So that's my separate Rive canvas that I drew. So I'm providing the Rive canvas, and then I'm providing an onload callback. And for those maybe not familiar with the WebJS runtime, what this onload callback does is once everything has been instantiated, such as the artboard created, the Rive file created, the WebAssembly is loaded in, we're ready to go for drawing, you can provide a callback function, and Rive will call back to this function once all that stuff has been prepped. And so basically I'm saying when Rive is ready to go, I'm going to call this app.setup active speaker listener thing. And I'll go over what that means in a bit. And I'm resizing the canvas to draw accordingly based on the device pixel ratio so we don't get blurry output. Cool. So I'm going to dive into this app.setup active speaker listener function. So this is a function that I created in this immersive app.js function file. So I'm going to go to that now. Immersive app.js. I'm going to see what the heck is this active speaker listener function. This is an async function, and what I'm using is the Zoom SDK. This .SDK is the Zoom library dependency that I've created previously, and I'm calling this onActiveSpeakerChange function. Now, if you recall earlier, what I did is when I was setting up the SDK, I configured it with a bunch of APIs that I'm requesting to call. So for example, that draw image thing, draw participant API to actually draw my camera on the canvas, as well as this onActiveSpeakerChange. And that was something that I configured also in the Zoom Marketplace for my app to tell it, hey, I need access to whenever the active speaker changes. So if someone else is speaking, I want to know when that is. And so when I call this .sdk.onActiveSpeakerChange, that's me subscribing to that event. And I'm providing an async callback to that. So very similar to that onload callback that we saw with the Rive SDK, the Rive runtime. I'm providing a callback to when the active speaker changes, and Zoom will just notify me and call this function when that happens. And it will provide me both with a timestamp and a list of users. The reason it gives a list of users is because you could have multiple speakers speaking at the same time. So it's an array of users, and it'll tell me like, hey, these are the people who are speaking. For now, just for ease of purposes, to show that only one person is going to speak at a given time, I'm just going to get the first user that's speaking. And so when the active speaker changes, I want to get that user. And when I get that user, I want to see what's their ID attribute, because I, in my application, know all the participants that are in this Zoom application when I click Start Session and I clicked on my participants. So I already have a map of the different IDs of each user. And so when I get this callback of like, hey, who's speaking, I just want to check and match up what the user that's speaking, get their ID and match it with the mapping of the participant that I have in my application. And then I can basically say, okay, if we have a match, position the Rive canvas under the active speaker. And so this is essentially what this is doing. So I've got this data attribute that I'm passing in on this data parameter. If I go back to index.js when I was calling that setup active speaker listener, I was passing in both the Rive canvas element, and I was also passing in this data object. And if you recall, I was calling this draw API, this thing that draws all the participants on the screen. The data attribute actually gives you the list of participants, and for each participant, what's their ID is also where they are laid out on the screen. Their coordinates is essentially what I want to get access to, so that I know where to position the Rive canvas under. So if I go back to this function here, I've got this for loop iterating over all of my data, over all my participants. And so you can see here, for each participant in my app's data, I'm trying to see if the ID matches up with a user that is speaking. This particular API looks to be deprecated, but I couldn't get it working with the one that they're suggesting, this participant UUID. I'm just using participant ID for now because that works for me. So yeah, what I'm doing is, I'm just seeing, hey, the active person that's speaking, does it match? Do I have a match on their ID? And if so, I'm going to position my Rive canvas element on the screen to wherever the participant is laid out on the screen. So you can see that participant.x and y, that's essentially the coordinate of where the participant started drawing on the canvas. And then I'm doing some math to basically just say, hey, draw the Rive canvas below that participant. So yeah, it's very hacky math, but it kind of shows how you can move around a Rive canvas to where different participants are located on the screen. And that's why I'm using this onActive speaker change API to basically get access to, hey, whenever a speaker changes, I want to know where they are on the screen, and then I can position my Rive content under it. And yeah, so that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm also doing some APIs. This is hard coding, basically drawing each participant on the screen, but you could iterate over all the participants on the screen and do that yourself as well. And yeah, that's really all I wanted to go over for this. Again, this is mainly just showing how we could take Zoom's starter app. This is kind of more of an advanced example app, and kind of building on top of it to show the easiest way to get Rive drawing something on the screen, and tapping into one of Zoom's SDK APIs to show how we can kind of coordinate that with Rive. Right now, this is building actually, let me start this over again. Oh, okay. I literally cannot actually create a new Zoom application for a few minutes. But you saw that 3 red dots spinning thing. That was just a simple timeline animation that wasn't using a state machine or anything. But what you can imagine is if we had the 2 heads here, and then we had a whole bottom layer canvas that maybe had a hedgehog or something pop up under the person that was speaking. You could do that all with a state machine. And yeah, that was what I was going to play with, but I don't think I'm gonna have enough time. And also, I think Zoom is free tier blocking me right now, which I should have expected to account for this meeting, but that's okay. But yeah, I might, if anyone has any questions, if y'all are tuning in, feel free to ask. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of share, not the most exciting like Rive interactive app to use, but how you could get started building an application. I skipped over a ton of details because I think it's just better to kind of scroll through all the documentation that Zoom has on building an application. And while it is more leaning on the kind of people who are into doing software development, because they use a lot of terminology like OWASP and authentication, and kind of having a knowledge of backend versus front end web application, you easily start with some of their reference applications. For example, they have this basic Zoom app that just creates an app for that sidebar that you were seeing, and you can just start there and build content on the sidebar. But I think it's more interesting that you could use their Layers API, the Zoom apps Layers API, to kind of build interactive content on the whole canvas that everyone sees when you start a Zoom meeting. At Rive, we have these retrospectives that where we have the whole team. We have this monthly kind of get together and talk about things that like went well, what didn't go well, and what we can do better, and some action items and things like that. And some things are timed, like a timer to add things to like a went well column. And I personally thought it'd be super cool if we could build a Zoom app, because we do use Zoom internally, to build like a fancy timer application to kind of coordinate how much time people have to write things in retrospective. So anyway, I think there's a lot of capabilities here, and maybe Zoom power users will understand maybe more of the real world use cases that could go into using Zoom with Rive. But yeah, the other part that makes a whole lot of sense for this is using the low level runtimes to create a whole Zoom scene, because you can have just one canvas that takes up the entire screen, and you have that just for Rive content, and you would use low-level APIs to kind of position different artboards, instant different artboards and state machines, and create kind of like a game almost. You could make everyone an avatar that moves up, down, left, right, and on each avatar you could have their like Zoom camera head on top of the head, so you're not actually drawing the face, you're just drawing the like video feed of each participant onto an avatar, and you can have them walk around. People themselves can walk around using the WASD kind of controls. That's kind of like that would be kind of like a pet project of mine, just to make a more interesting kind of like top-down kind of game-looking feel app. But yeah, I would definitely start with exploring some of these reference applications, seeing kind of the code behind what it takes to build a Zoom application. And then I will post this code online on an open source repo under my GitHub profile. And you can take a look at the changes that I made to make Rive work with Zoom in this case. So you can kind of get a sense of how you can start adding Rive to Zoom as well. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. I hope to do maybe a separate Zoom app creative stream maybe in the future to actually show building from scratch, like, what a really cool Zoom app scene. That might take a lot more time than what I've already taken up now, but yeah, I think tapping into these two technologies together will be super cool. And if you have any use cases, feel free to drop those in the comments or in Discord, because yeah, I honestly had no idea these SDKs existed to kind of tap into the canvas of Zoom at all. And yeah, hopefully we'll see more of this in the future. But I think I'm not seeing any questions for now. I'm going to Probably call it a bit early here, since I can't really build anything on Zoom right now. It is free tiered me, free tier block me. So we have. I don't think we have a stream tomorrow, but we definitely have a Tuesday stream next week. And of course, another creative stream on Wednesday, maybe a workshop the following Thursday. But definitely check out our announcements on Rive. We have a really exciting week here. You saw that we launched Follow Path Constraint, I believe just yesterday. So, have a gander and look at those. Check out our documentation to see what runtime version you need to bump to get support for that. And just stay tuned, and we'll see y'all later. Thank you.